Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm the Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, quarterly European magazine, also bi-weekly newsletter, and a huge group on LinkedIn. I think almost 50,000 members worldwide. And I'm also the architect of the IT supply map. I will explain later in this context how we use that. And we're going to start this webinar, this live webinar, the next 60 minutes. We talk about TMS, also about control towers, and what's the use, especially in these turbulent times. All right, with me I have an expert on this matter, and next to myself you see Elmer. Elmer Spruijt, you have been working in the supply chain for a long time. You started out with your studies on physics and astronomy, so in a technical university. So welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Yep.
Do you still use this kind of knowledge you have studied back in the days, or how do you can use it?
Well, I think the curiosity and the drive to understand complex issues is still something which is very much needed in today's logistics processes. So in that sense, it's used. The detailed calculations on supernova and black holes is not something that I do apply daily, unfortunately. But yeah.
Well, you know, it's sometimes for logistic, it seems like a black hole. Where's my packets in my pallets? But anyway, and so you also worked for Accenture for 14 years, doing all kinds of supply chain projects, and later on you have been working at Schiphol, a scale-up freight forwarder kind of company, and then you moved to Descartes, and now you're responsible for transportation management solutions within Descartes.
Yeah, that's true. No, the last 2 years at Descartes. Yeah.
So yes, so we will talk about TMS, also about control towers in the next hour. But before we start, you know, for the audience, this webinar is recorded and will be made available on YouTube. The PDF will be also made available within 48 hours. The audience is on mute, so you're all on mute, but you can interact with us. So you see on the right-hand side, you see the chat functionality. You can chat, and people will respond to that. Probably, you know, the first question is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is. But if you want to have questions on the matter of TMS, control towers, and you name it, then use the Q&A functionality on the right-hand side. So if the questions are in line of the conversation I will be having with Elmer, I will ask this question right away. If not, we have an extra Q&A at the end of this hour, and beyond that, we have an extra 30 minutes after the whole hour, and you can sit down with the three of us, with the two of us. So then you will see this. You will have a virtual lounge, and then you can talk to us after this. As of this point, Elmer and I will put off the camera, so you can enlarge your screen and have a better view on the slides. All right. So let's talk about supply chain. So we all know that in the last 4 years, we have seen a lot of what we call black swans. On the lower left, you see COVID happening, lockdown, shortages, and all kind of bullwhips, and also leading to inflation and recession up and down, and the bullwhip also in e-commerce, growth in e-commerce, and it's falling back in the last 1-2 years. And then also 2 years ago, the war in Ukraine started. Gas supply was an issue, and also raising costs. And last year, the Gaza conflict started, you know, with the blockage of the Red Sea, and also leading to all kinds of inflation and turmoil in the world. And CSRD, you know, is might be a black swan for a lot of companies because almost 55,000 companies in Europe will be impacted by the CSRD regulations in next year, directly or indirectly. So this is all the world we're talking about in the next hour. So Elmer, what's your take? What kind of topics are you addressing when you're talking to your clients?
Yeah, so in essence, let's say the combination of these topics are often on the table, right? So how do you create a supply chain that's flexible, that can signal issues, that can respond quickly with all those stakeholders that are typically involved, right? So the fact that, let's say, these issues occur, indeed, there's many more even, increase the demand for data and a solution and exchange of data that enables you to mitigate them. Yeah.
So basically, in the last 4 years, We've seen a lot of demand for real-time transport visibility because of these issues, and we'll discuss it later. What we did in the last fall, we interviewed 81 supply chain executives in Europe, and we asked what are the main goals for their supply chain and business transformations. So number one is, well, resilience and agility, and the number two is cost reduction. So that's major. But a bit lower is well, also relating to CSRD decarbonization, also embed and use of AI, and also the executive mentioned a lot that the implementation of modern supply chain software solutions like TMS and WS is on their radar screen. So when you look at these results, so what's your take, Elmer?
Yeah, so it's indeed a very hot topic, and you could also, at least for some companies, not for all of them, say that 5 years with Corona, it was all about visibility, having insights, and now let's say you also want to have control. So it's more about how do you interact and not only signal an issue, but interact with stakeholders to mitigate it. I think that's the next step, which is in line with, yeah, indeed, how are you more resilient, right? How do you have a modern solution? So those topics are certainly very top of mind today.
Yeah, and what's quite remarkable, in my opinion, is that 5 to 10 years ago, manufacturing companies and also wholesalers and retailers are talking about sales and operations planning. So that's more the tactical side of it. But in the last few years, especially the last 2 years, companies are talking more about S&OE, sales and operation execution, and basically, S&OE is the field of, well, WMS, warehouse management, transport management, the operational side of it. So that's also on their radar screen, and we'll talk about later that in the old days it was the world of the 3PL, the logistics service providers, but now you see the cargo owners also want this kind of application because they want to be on top of this execution. All right, quick introduction about Descartes. So this is my IT subway map. This is the 2024 edition for Europe. So to explain it briefly, you see all kind of subway lines resembling the different kind of solutions: ERP, WMS, TMS, SAP, and you name it. So basically, companies have to prove that they have implementations live in Europe to get a subway station. And here's Descartes, and that we'll discuss later. But basically, Descartes is a pure play in logistics and has a broad scope of kind of solution. You mentioned Elmer, the carbon accounting is not on it, but there's a reason, because that's kind of new super line, and the number of implementations are relatively low compared to the other solutions.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but maybe you can explain a bit more about Descartes, and then we get to your side of how you present your solution provider, Descartes.
Yep. Thanks, Martijn. Yeah, and I think it's good to share a little bit about the type of company that we are. Just so everybody understands where we're coming from. Let's say, in short, we are a global company. We have 2,400 people, or a little bit more now, I think, around 26,000 customers who use, of course, the right range of software solutions that we provide. And like Martijn said, we're a pure player on logistics software, so that's really our expertise, our bread and butter. We have been growing for the last 20 years. We're also listed on the Nasdaq and the Toronto Stock Exchange, right? So there's no VC back, that's all publicly available. Our revenue is around 600 million now, and we're quite focused on, of course, further developing our solutions. So that's in short, let's say, our background.
Yeah, right. And that's quite impressive. So you are I think in the top 10 of the major supply chain software players around the world, and that is expressing these figures rightly. So maybe you can talk about the solutions, the kind of solutions you are providing.
Yeah, so very short, we structured the company in 7 business units or pillars, focused on solutions on the left-hand side, where we are, if you have your own dedicated trucks, so that we talk about routing of those trucks and truck maintenance, etc. We have the transportation management for companies, cargo owners typically, that are using external parties or in combination with their own trucks. a more WMS focused on e-commerce companies. A lot of data, we'll come back to that later, but we collect via the different solutions. So we have a lot of trade data that we share, and also the night party screening that's unfortunately today, due to all kinds of effects and wars, quite a hot topic. A set of solutions focused on the forwarders and on customs, let's say, is also a set of solutions. And all of these can be, to a certain extent, combined with a TMS or a control tower for a certain cargo owner.
And if you look at it, you have your network. So are all these applications in the cloud, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I think, and there will be a bit more detail on that, but the founding principle of Descartes is that for trade, to enable trade and logistics, you need to exchange data. And the backbone of these solutions is indeed the flow of data to our network, and that's indeed represented in the center that we call our Global Logistics Network, or GLN. And that's used in a different way, but almost for all those solutions, there's some way on how they're exchanging data with the various parties involved in the logistics process.
And looking at the broad scope of these pillars, I imagine that you have different kind of users, from logistics service providers, the mom and pop shop with will have extra trucks, the carriers, but also the freight forwarders, and also the cargo owners, manufacturing companies, retail companies, wholesalers. So a whole bunch of kind of companies are using your kind of solution in the pillars.
Yeah, it ranges really. Sometimes it's from like indeed a mom and pop shop with a warehouse / living place using an automated parcel shipping solution, to, let's say, very large cargo owners having 100 locations across the world, warehouses where they are using and processing hundreds of thousands of shipments per week to our system. So it's indeed a broad range of users that use our different solutions.
But it's also good to express, that IT is becoming more and more strategic. So choosing the right partner, you mentioned in our pre-call, it's like a marriage. So you have to choose the right partner. You can develop your own IT strategy.
Yeah, indeed. And I think a marriage is really a good metaphor. Certainly, if you look at a control tower or TMS solution, right, that's a choice that you do not want to make again after a few years because you're not happy. So it's very important to understand on who is your partner and do they fit with your long-term objectives. So that's why I think it's really important to spend some time before you seal the marriage, let's say.
Yeah. You don't want a divorce after a few years.
Yeah.
So let's zoom into the TMS world. What is the value of a TMS nowadays?
Yeah, the value, I mean, it keeps on increasing, right? It's in a sense that, well, those events that happen, but also the reporting and the let's say, the continuous improvement of IT and the sharing of data that enables companies to optimize their transport so much more than they did in the past. So if you are a company that's doing, of course, a certain amount of shipments, and here we use 1,000 as sort of a minimum per year. Yeah, it's you need to have a tool, at least if you want to be most competitive, to automate as much as possible and plan and optimize where you can, right? And there's still, unfortunately today, although we're in the 21st century, a lot of companies, cargo owners, that are either using a large, sometimes outsourced teams somewhere in a low-cost country, doing a lot of manual stuff, calling, emailing with a lot of stakeholders, or they have IT departments themselves building connections, etc. Or they have like 10 or sometimes even more tools, each focused on a different specific element of their logistics process, which they then need to combine. So in essence, it's not the ideal setup. You would like to have one tool that helps you to facilitate your end-to-end process, and that's what a TMS or control tower can do for you.
So looking at this, from 1,000 shipments, I can imagine when you have a successful international web shops, you will get to this 1,000 shipments quite easily. So that's the one thing. But on the middle, I think, the CO2, the carbon emission reporting of CSRD will be paramount in the next year. So I think that will be, an accelerator of this kind of tooling, because you have to have this kind of information. Otherwise, you have to express this on your web shop. What is the carbon emission of this shipment in a few years?
Yeah, and certainly, and that's the complexity, let's say, and that's my maybe my background, and it helps a little bit, or at least I'm always eager to understand the detail, right? If you are a web shop and doing relatively easy, between brackets, shipments, and you do 1,000 per year, it's not so much. If you do 1,040 feet ocean containers, then it's already a different type of company, a different level of complexity in terms of documentation, etc. That's needed to be able to execute that. So it's indeed, it's not a one size fits all approach. It depends a bit on how you're organized and what's your transport need or your customer's transport need.
Yeah. What is the impact of all this on your solution, and how do you express this? What the value are?
Yeah, so it's really results in tailored discussions that we have with our customers, and that makes it more complex. And you see also when companies are looking and trying to understand what such a solution can mean for them. It's not a recorded video that we can replay for them and it just sort of see what it means, right? It really takes us to deep dive in, hey, what are you doing? How is your process organized? With what type of partners do you work? How many suppliers do you have? Indeed, all those different volumes, different WMSs, sometimes even multiple ERPs that they use. It's a tailor-made discussion that we have to determine how are you organized today and how can we potentially optimize it. And then you will see, and I think that's where I'm really really excited about the huge opportunity that we often uncover together with our customers on, hey, we can make a lot of manual activities redundant, automate them, reduce costs, or we can reduce transportation spend. There's often also a lot of improvements to be made on how we notificate customers or stakeholders, right? So there's a lot of stuff that can be automated today to send the right message to them. And if they're able to send data to their stakeholders or to their LSPs executing their shipments, that's also an area where a lot of speed can be increased in terms of when bookings are done, accepted, maybe replanned, etc. So the level of flexibility and resilience increases as well.
Yeah, as a consumer, I order from web shops. Well, not every week, but sometimes, and then you get these updates when your package will be arriving, etc. But if you imagine that as a large company, you have thousands of this kind of notifications. You want to have an overview out of this, and also to your end customer, if you're sending out all these packages, you don't want to use this kind of emails and Excels to update when things are arriving for your customer.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, in a sense, it's very positive that we as consumers are used to having more insight, and I think in the B2B world we're getting there, and of course the volumes are bigger, so it's more. You don't want to have a text message. Preferably, we drive a supply chain mainly by system-to-system communication, so that your customer or warehouse only gets notified when there's a certain deviation, right? They don't need to receive all messages in a UI, preferably not even.
No, it's more like exception-based communication. What you want.
Yeah.
Let's have a deeper look at the logistic ecosystem. I like this picture very much. It's very complex, but maybe you can explain what it's all about, because this is reflecting what's behind the scene in this whole ecosystem in logistics.
Yeah, and certainly, and of course, this doesn't apply sort of one-to-one to all businesses, but certainly if you are an international business, then the complexity increases quite drastically with the shipments that you do, right? I think typically today, if you ship something, there's 10 parties involved getting a container, for example, from China to Europe, which still happens a lot of the online buys that we do. It comes somewhere out of China. And there's so many parties involved, and it can be different modalities from air, ocean, rail, a local carrier maybe in China, a local carrier in Europe. There's customs involved. There's the port, the terminal. So there's many different ways. Some of those stakeholders are emailing, some of them are calling. Typically, it's really a chaos of data flows that are needed, or at least are triggered by just a transport. And then imagine if you have also your business is also not sort of one unit. It's typically a lot of different sites with sometimes different cultures, different ways of working, different time zones. So it really is a challenge to get all that data in a structured way, in a timely fashion, automatically in one system. But on the other hand, it is essential if you really want to automate it.
Yeah, and then look at all these notifications, this exclamation marks. We talk a lot about logistic disruption in the supply chain, the Red Sea blockage. But when you look at this notification, these are also all kind of possible and even recurring disruptions in your data flows behind the scene in your supply chain.
Yeah, it's enormous, because indeed there's the events that we discussed before, but there's also a lot of, let's say, human mini disasters. On somebody makes a typo, somebody doesn't read an email, a carrier makes maybe an update to their interface, and the data is not shared directly as expected before, and the system does not capture a certain data field. Exchange rates might not be updated correctly. There's so many different errors that can be made, and in essence are made every day across your whole supply chain, which some might not have a big impact and some might have a huge impact for your process.
And still, EDI. Not all the companies are using EDI for their communication, and now some companies are, creating their own supplier portal, and suppliers are being, addressed by multiple clients to connect with different kind of supplier portals. So that's also making world not easier, I would say.
Yeah, no, and it's sometimes sort of almost funny or sad that we're now in the era of the large language models, where we're trying to make things smarter, and there are certainly certain applications within a control tower. If we talk about predictability or using algorithms to search for data quality issues or fraud, for example, that we're using more AI functions. But on the other hand, there's also initiatives where people are trying, or certain companies, to automatically read emails and translate them into an order using such models. It can be done to a certain extent, but in essence, EDI, which already is there for like 40 years, does it quite effectively. It's not very sexy, but it still does the trick. So not all issue requires AI to be solved, and there's still a lot of these issues can be solved by an EDI or an API connection. So it's sometimes simpler than just to solve at least one specific issue than you think.
Yeah, with the AI example you made, it sounds like AI patchwork of, having not the right portfolio in place to manage all this, small human errors and disasters.
Yep.
So what is your approach at Descartes?
Yeah, so what we try to do, and like I said earlier, it's sort of the backbone of Descartes, is that we say we don't want to provide a solution which is sort of offline and optimizes, and then you need to figure out as a company on how to make it a reality. We from the beginning said we want to facilitate that data exchange that is essential to get anything done. So we have been building our network for the last 30 years, and we're still adding thousands of carriers every month. So it's continuously growing. And there's a broad range of parties that are on it, right? So we have, as an example, just on the left top, there's, for example, every day we have 140,000 trucks that are driving routes based on what our software is saying. Of course, we have a lot of carriers for the different modalities integrated. It's from air, ocean, and this is not only, let's say, that we extract data. We have a view, right? So it's not only visibility, but we also have a two-way connection with, for example, those ocean carriers where we do bookings, we share VGM, shipping instructions, etc. Right? So we try to really automate the data exchange between such a company and a cargo owner, for example, because we want to really automate the flow and give the control to the cargo owner.
So if I look at this, this sounds very logical, to have a provider like Descartes to have a platform. But I can imagine, look at in the world of Google and Meta and you name it, there's kind of a battle between networks or platform. Do you expect that this will happen also in the near future? On our software map, you see a few, only a handful tops of possible similar providers having this kind of platforms and networks, or don't you think that it will happen this kind of battle for platforms or networks?
Yeah, to a certain extent, there is a battle going on. On the other hand, there's no other platform, let's say, covering the same scope, right? So if you just take an example for air, the airlines don't want to build thousands of connections. So they already said 20 years back, if anybody wants to get data, they need to work with one of the existing platforms that they connected with. And Descartes is the biggest, for example. So a lot of those new platforms, they're actually built on the existing platform. So we supply a lot of data to other platforms just because that specific group is not interested in building more. So it's a tricky business, and also the changes, right, that we said before. It's not only the mistakes, but all interfaces get updated. So it's also quite an intensive business. It's not easy to have this up and running.
No, yeah, and you mentioned, you have thousands of carriers, but there are way more still out there. So that there's so much to gain for you, but also the other companies who are building a sort of a platform.
Yeah, no, we have hundreds of thousands now connected, but it's sort of, it never ends. There's constantly new ones. Certainly, as our customers switch and use other providers, and we build new connections. I think what maybe is a positive thing is those connections are beneficial for cargo owners or shippers and for carriers and forwarders as well. So they both benefit from, hey, let's not exchange emails or do phone calls, but have a system-to-system communication. So there are synergies for, let's say, for both parties to automate it.
So let's have a look at the flow of how you use a TMS and what can be automated and how you can gain it from it.
Yeah, so if we, let's say the data part that we just discussed, I think that's sort of the basis. But of course, on top of that, you would like to apply intelligence, logic, as much as possible to facilitate and use the data that you exchange with your partners, right? And for TMS, we typically look at it from a process perspective. So from the beginning, from planning to pre-shipment, to the execution phase, post-shipment, and the continuous improvement. And there's so many benefits that are not all of them are always relevant for all of our customers. Let's say for most, if you look, you typically want to have sort of automatic order intake in your control tower or TMS. Typically, that's a connection with an ERP system, for example. And then one of the big steps already is consolidation, right? And there's many situations where companies work with really predefined carriers for certain regions, and they're not looking so much at, hey, how can we consolidate? And they might even ship multiple shipments to the same customer or same location per day that could have been consolidated. And with a system getting all the data, you can let it run and re-optimize every hour, for example. So there's already quite a big potential saving for a lot of our customers just at consolidating shipments. And sort of similar then after consolidation, of course, the carrier selection, right? Which carrier do we pick? And the system can help and even automatically pick one based on, of course, costs, but it can also be on service level or maybe now on CO2 emissions. Then a fourth one, the route optimization. So for some companies, they either have their own trucks or they want to have a sort of routing. So that's a potential saving for a company. Yeah, and pre-shipment, we go on with the document creation that's often needed. That can be automated. There can be spot quotes made if a certain contract is not in place and you want to get a rate for a certain shipment to a certain destination. The dock scheduling, right? Where do we expect the shipment to be picked up? Which dock? And then in the execution phase, that what we mentioned before, a lot about the collaboration. Can you have your suppliers also working in your control tower, in your TMS? Do you share certain data with them? Do you collect all the visibility data real time from all of your shipments that are in progress? Maybe you have a mobile app for drivers scanning stuff that they deliver. Do you have certain pings that your system triggers on deviations? And then we'll go more into the data flow, where the freight audit is a typical one that's very beneficial, or pre-billing sometimes, and the whole dispute management around it. And all of that data gathered is then, of course, a huge, interesting data lake for, let's say, maybe more data scientists, even, you could argue, people that want to see trends and analyze how are my LSP performers performing, or how was my service to a certain customer, or what's the CO2 reporting, what's the data quality, do we see deviations, do we see certain process errors that we can fix? So there's so much to be won if you have it in the system. You have the data, you can analyze, you can optimize, and that's that's really, really beneficial for a lot of companies.
Last week, I got a call from a supply chain director of a very large company, and he was looking for some sort of solution for freight audits and about the claims. Do you pay the right amount, that kind of stuff. But I think that's only one element of the whole story. I think the matter of the fact is, if you have this kind of questions, do we pay the right amount of money to the right carriers based on certain contracts, etc. And we was wondering, should I use large language model to get through all the contracts and the invoices? What's your take on that? Is it not also patchworks in hindsight?
No, and I think there's two things to consider here. So one is indeed, if you have point solutions for all of these different topics, it's the combined effort that it takes to run them is certainly 2 times higher than if you have one, right? So many synergies, because if you share the data, you do the booking, for example, you already have the contracts in your TMS or your control tower. You already communicate to them, maybe, for example, a pre-billing or receive the invoice, right? If you have that connection as well. So there's so much synergies by having, let's say, one solution to gather all that data versus 20 different solutions that have so many overlap of data. So that's one. And the other is, like I said earlier, the large language models, they are very useful if you have a lot of different input, people typing in questions. There can be millions of different questions. For an invoice audit, the added value is limited. So I would just first start with, let's get the data via the old school EDI message, and you can compare the cost quite easily. It's not rocket science.
No. On the other hand, companies try to simplify their IT portfolio, but also some companies stick to the ERP environment. Whereas, McKinsey wrote an article, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, that you have to get rid of your planning functionality out of your ERP to make yourself more flexible and not depending on your ERP. So,
Yep.
all right. If you have this in place, we talked about large language models, automation. So, what's your approach of the level automation of this whole process?
Yeah. So, and that's the human factor comes into play here a little bit, right? It depends on, let's say, what your as-is process was, typically on how you wanna go on your automation journey, you could say. So I just show a few elements that I think we mentioned before, like consolidation, the carrier selection, etc. You can set all the business rules in your control tower TMS and have it automatically take all decisions. But what we typically do see is that when you just start with such a system, it's preferred to have like a pop-up with a recommendation, and then you need to approve the recommendation from the system, and you can maybe fine-tune it a bit and also get some more confidence in, hey, the rules that I initiated or that I set up are actually making sense in most of the time. So we see that we start with a little bit of a lower automation, and then after we use it for a certain period of time, we increase the automation, and that can be across the different functionalities.
When you look at transport or logistics, a certain amount is contracted logistics and a certain amount is the spot buying part. Do you see this shifting within your user base, that companies are maybe using more contracts or less contracts and relying more on a spot market?
Yeah, I think it's often the let's say the demand is driving that. So I think now we see a lot of contracts, so there's not so much need, but still there's always let's say the 5% of shipments where they're out of the standard contract, and it might be useful to go on the spot market and get a price. But the majority, at least what I see in practice today, is in scope of existing contracts.
But there's also logic in your system to adjust to that matter when you have bookings on that and that side.
Yeah, you can indeed automatically request multiple parties to provide rates if they're not in the system. So that's certainly also something that the system can support you with. Yeah.
So you mentioned, the use of spot markets and contracts depending on the market and the demand of transport capacity. But maybe you can explain the different ways how you can create synergies with your system.
Yeah. So one of the I think the interesting ones indeed is for example with consolidation, that today we often encounter situations where at least at certain sites there's like a standard way of working, a preferred carrier, and they just, when an order gets in, they want to ship it as quickly as possible, and there's not much consideration on optimizing that and reanalyzing if it's actually done in the most efficient way. And that's a great added value of a system to collect all those orders, different requests coming in, typically from the ERP, and then see, okay, what are the timeliness, when is the cutoff period, and rerun consolidation engine to determine what's the best setup, right? And on the simple side, it can be, we'll just combine a few orders into one shipment to a certain location or a certain customer. But it can also be more complex scenarios where you say, okay, we're going to pull from different locations. So you're consolidating over multiple sites, and taking all the demand in, say, hey, we'll pull it into one location, and from that location it goes consolidated to the final location. And another variant is, of course, where we have a multi-stop situation where we put it together and then we make multiple stops. We drop it off. Sometimes we pick it even up something again at the second or third stop, right? So this in basic, it's almost like chess, right? It's not super complex, but if you let the software run free, there's like millions of combinations it can make, and it will automate and decide on what's the best scenario for all of those combinations to optimize the costs and services for your customers. So it's certainly a huge improvement area often for a lot of companies.
And I can imagine, it's also depending on your business strategy. Are you a low-cost company? Are you a more customer intimate, have a service orientation? Or, so I think, or even are you more sustainable? So I think these different kind of strategies, cost, service, or sustainability is also driving different kind of solutions out of your system, like Descartes.
Yeah, and you could even say this can help you to underline or reinforce your brand promise, right? So indeed, how do you want to come across? The most sustainable way, most cost effective, or the highest service level, and yeah, that's really something that you can put to practice with how you deliver your goods to your customers.
Yeah. And over time, if you have thousands of shipments, you can have also a better view what is our sustainability improvement if we go from cost to sustainability. And I think this kind of optimization over thousands of shipments will make it more visible how you can pivot from one strategy to the other.
Yeah, and I think that's I mean, Excel is still a very nice tool. We use it in a lot of cases, but if you do this, and I think that's typically a TMS or control tower is applied across countries for one company, and having all of the data, all of those insights, and indeed seeing the effect of shifting certain shipments maybe to another transport mode, or combining it more, etc. There's a lot of interesting analysis that you can do and improvements that you can find by looking at that complete data across the different sites that you typically have.
Yeah, and the good thing about this visualization is you have to map out your different kind of supply chain and logistic chains, how you service your customer. Otherwise, you don't see the complexity and you cannot explain what is the target KPI. Is it cost or sustainability? So I think this kind of simplified visualization of your logistic flow will explain a bit more, how to get to your goals.
Yeah, and it's a very interactive process, right? It's also not something where you just say, well, we'll switch it, push on the button, and now it's optimized.
No.
It takes a discussion. It's a joint session workshop where we say, okay, how do we make your process as efficient as we can make it with the use of a system? Yeah.
And of course, one supply chain doesn't fit all. So basically, you can differentiate between product groups, geographies, etc.
Yeah.
So basically, on your size in different areas, you will pick a different kind of strategy to service your customer.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That sounds very interesting. Let's talk about how it will look like. I think we all know Booking.com. So how does it look like in your environment?
Yeah. So well, and I think that's sometimes we show a screen, but in essence, let's say the real power is when you don't need to look at a screen. But to depict something, we do show something. So this is just an example on where your system, and we have those. I mean, like I said, hundreds of thousands of companies connected. Of course, there are all the large parcel carriers are in there, so it's super easy to get all the rates for a certain shipment weight and dimensions, and real time see, okay, what are the rates, and then let the system optimize, right? In this case, it shows different options. But like I said, most of our customers, after a certain amount of time, they say, well, I will look at the data once per month to see how it runs, but I don't want to see the screen anymore because I trust the algorithm to make the right choice based on the business rules that we've set. But yeah, just getting the data and being able to let the system choose, is a really big improvement for a lot of companies that are just stuck often with one provider, for example.
And I can imagine, some supply chain directors are surprised in hindsight from the spent logistic cost in the last quarter. I can imagine with this kind of system, you can, to some extent, predict what your spent logistic costs will be based on your shipments, etc., so that you have a better grasp of no surprises at the end of the quarter financially, that you have spent way more than you expected.
Yeah, and again, this is also where you can see that, for example, hey, we have the rates here, right? And here's for parcel, but it can also be with an FTL shipment, etc., where you have contracted rates. So when you have the system to combine certain orders, consolidate it, then select the right carrier, you get that rate data, weight dimension, etc. It also makes it more understandable that if you want to do a freight audit later, you already have all the data in your system. You agree to it, you send it to the customer. You have that connection, you get the invoice back. I think it underlines on, hey, makes sense, most efficient if you then also check the invoice versus the contracted rate in the same system.
Yeah, and I can imagine, Black Friday is coming up. You don't want to be surprised by, paying way too much or unexpectedly more because of certain contracts, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and the system sees the order, so you know the expected costs.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting, also in a financial way. And next, when you look at CSRD and carbon emissions, so what is your view on that?
Yeah, so that's of course an important topic. Certainly here in Europe, in the US, it's coming up as well. I think at least in California, there's some regulation around it. So. It's important, or it's mandatory for companies to have insight in their CO2 emissions, also for the contracted transport that they have. So we support our customers. And again, if you have this one control tower, one system where you have the data, you want to apply also the same logic to calculate and determine what are the CO2 emissions. And it helps that, let's take ocean as an example, where we send the VGM, so we know the weight of the container. We get the message back from the ocean carrier. We know actually some cases, or a lot of cases nowadays, on which vessel is actually going to ship my container, how many containers are on that vessel, what's the engine in it. So we have all those data points that are needed to be as accurate as possible to calculate what is the emissions caused by my transport. So we have that data, we can calculate it, and we can do it uniformly across the different LSPs, right? There's no, let's say, a different calculation for a different party. Of course, for the different modalities, there are different ways to calculate it. So it's, it's a really upcoming and interesting topic that every company needs to look into and is busy with, I think, now on getting that data and exchange, and also then see how they can use the data to optimize.
So basically, a lot of companies nowadays are using averages, rule of thumbs, but in the end, you need to have the actual carbon emission data, and because otherwise you are, not able to improve over time.
Yeah, well, I think you can still improve with an estimate. I mean, actual is always a bit tricky. What's the actual, right? We're going, for example, we can measure the actual number of kilometers driven. We know the weight, and we know in some cases specifically need which engine type, which fuel type is used, so we can be pretty accurate on the CO2 emissions. We don't have it. Well, if we have it, then we could measure it as well, but typically I don't see an actual measure device in a truck, for example, on the actual emissions. But it's pretty close where we get today with all of those data points. So you can already, optimize based on that.
So there's a question from the audience: how do you calculate the carbon emissions? How do you know what kind of truck is used, a Euro 5 engine or a Euro 6 engine? I don't know if you go to that detail.
Yeah, that depends a bit. So that depends on the let's say the road carriers that our customers are working with. So we can collect the data if they're willing to share it. And like I said, right, for ocean, for example, we often get the actual name of the vessel, and then we know we have a repository of which engines, for example, are used in that vessel, how many containers are on that vessel, so we can calculate the emissions. But of course, we are dependent on the availability of the data with those partners.
So I do know that all the trucks, they do have telematics inside, and a lot of the vendors like yourself are using telematics to get data from trucks. I can imagine that in the end, you will also add data about the truck itself in this telematics environment, so you can add it to your carbon emission reporting.
Yep. So we're connecting with the telematics devices indeed for trucks, for example, and then we can ping every few minutes the exact location. In some cases, we also connect with the onboard unit. So that's from the OEM, from the truck. And there's even more data points that we can gather from the onboard unit, for example, about weight, or maybe if the truck doors are opened, yes or no. There's additional data elements becoming available to us, and that for certain customers are really relevant. And certainly also we have use cases where we have actual trackers that are on the cargo, either for anti-theft or for temperature tracking, depending on what they need, or for shocks, right? So there's different ways on how we track different cargos.
So basically, that's resembling what you see here on this map.
Yeah, this is another example. In essence, you don't want to look at the screen because you want your flow to be automated and let's say going as planned. But we do track, the system needs to track all shipments, and this is a view of some ocean shipments where we track all of them continuously. You can easily zoom in, select on certain locations which ones are behind schedule, and we get that data. And the same applies for the other modalities. We get the data, and it can be enriched with indeed things like I said, the temperature, shock, etc., depending on if that's needed or relevant for your transport.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about, in the last few minutes, about the benefits. And you mentioned here some customers. Maybe start what kind of customers you have, and then we can talk about the benefits of all this.
Yeah. And I think just like I mentioned before, so we have, let's say, cargo owners that are benefiting from our solutions, as well as forwarders or carriers. So both have a benefit and can reduce their costs per transport. So I think both help in that sense. It's a lot of effort that we're typically able to automate, and we said it before, with either on the intelligence side, right? How do I consolidate, yes or no? Which carrier do I pick, etc.? Something that a system can relatively easy take over and do better. But the same is also applies to documents that need to be created. The data is in essence typically in our TMS or in our control tower, so we can create those documents automatically for the different shipments. So a lot of effort is reduced. The transport spend, of course, if we're able to consolidate shipments, typically having an FTL or an LTL versus a parcel, an FTL versus LTL, is on per shipment a lower cost. Really interesting saving. The same you would also get from the freight audit functionality. In almost all cases, there are errors found that help you to reduce your transport spend. So that's also a really important driver for having that functionality. Yeah, and then if you look at the visibility that we just showed a little bit, right? You can share that data, like that, preferably system to system, or with notifications to your customers or to your warehouses or stakeholders. So you prevent them for wondering, hey, where is my stuff when it's arriving? And they might have a real-time tracker, so they can see the truck driving, so they know exactly. It's like, oh, it's still 10 kilometers away or 500 or whatever. So that's also important. And that has a cascading effect, of course, on customer satisfaction, right? The brand promise that you bring, and that even increases in some cases. We have customers that are really saying, hey, we completely shifted the perception of our own company for our customers, and we have a much better relationship. So it also has an impact on revenue and sales. And the same you have, or sort of similar, where you say, well, we're more on top of where our transport is when it is arriving, where we have a higher certainty, the more reliable supply chain. So with our planning, our inventory management, we have lesser safety stock, and we see a working capital saving, right? Another sort of an indirect consequence of managing your logistics better, which does have in the end a very, very concrete financial impact. So those things are maybe second order impacts, but still significant and really important for customers.
Yeah. If you look at the logos on the left, you see users all over the supply chain, upstream in the chemicals environment or downstream in the FMCG, and also logistic service providers in between. So basically all kind of, and probably from very small to very big. So I think a whole plethora of users. What's your recommendation, where to start? Because I think, you see the benefits on the right hand side. Is there a typical starting point where companies, prospects are coming to you to discuss this kind of solution of a TMS?
Yeah, but so I think the starting point indeed is on, I think was a little bit in what we earlier discussed on what's your current situation, right? So it's maybe you could argue that for ERPs or CRMs, it's a bit more expected or standard. There's one system managing that company, right? And somehow in logistics, we're a little bit behind. We still accept to a certain, at least to a certain degree for some companies, that we either use a lot of Excels or self-made tools that have some functionality, but it's not yet sort of the golden standard that just like you have an ERP or CRM system, you also have a TMS. And I think that's a starting point on, hey, how is your company managing that, and all those different activities, and what's then the benefit on or the potential benefit for having such a system, and what's then of course the right partner for you to help you realize those benefits.
Well, the good news is, as I said, we did a large survey across Europe among 81 senior supply chain executives in Europe, and the number one tool these executives want is a end-to-end control tower. And lower down, you see also digital supply chain twins. So that's in your field. When I look at your solution, it's not a very narrow TMS. It's quite broad, especially with all the other adjacent solutions you are providing at Descartes. So basically, you are on top of this number one list for the Christmas holidays, what they want.
Yeah, it should be, and I think that's some of the legacy systems that are also called TMS are sometimes more offline. So they have some logic, but they're not yet connected with all the stakeholders. And I think that's where some of the need is coming from. Hey, I want to have a control tower because if I have a system which sort of shows me nice graph or how I need to do something, but it's not affected in my real transport process, then what's the impact in the end? And I think there comes the need for the control towers, and for us, and that's why I also included one picture on the visibility, for example. Yeah, that's a key component of your TMS, your control tower. Without it, it's like it's the eyes of the brain, you could say. Without it, it's very difficult to optimize. So for us, we clearly see indeed the TMS control tower is one and the same thing, where you want to have the insight and the control across the whole process and all those different stakeholders.
Yeah. Another thing, I did some interviews with 5 supply chain executives who participated in my survey, and also a large element in all this is, there's a scarcity of talents, and because of that, all around the world, so there's a whole need of supply chain planners for transport, manufacturing, you name it. So that's also one of the reasons that more and more companies are creating a supply chain center of excellence, and then they sit together in hubs in Europe, in Asia, and the US, mainly in 3 continents because of the time zones. But also, as a consequence, they need some sort of a control tower to facilitate these center of excellences to do their planning, for different countries, geographies, and you name it. So the scarcity of talent will also push companies to create center of excellence, and also to facilitate them with a control tower.
Yeah, and there's another interesting effect that we see at some of our customers where we automate some of the simple between bracket tasks and enable them to have, let's say, those people to be more like a data scientist versus just an operational person doing certain emails or calls, etc. So we can also help to make the average activities for those people much more interesting, because the simple stuff is done by the system, and they need to look at just more the complex ones or the logic that the system applies, which typically they find more rewarding than the more repetitive work.
So also in the second one, AI in production supply planning, that's also what you're referring to. You want your your planners to do the more intelligent stuff. Do some scenarios, what if, etc.
Yeah.
All right. I think we are also out of time, so that it's the bad news. But the good news, we have an extra 30 minutes afterwards. So Elmer and I will be sitting in the virtual lounge right after this. So we will have an extra 30 minutes if you have some more questions to either of us. So join me if you want. To wrap up, there's some more information. So on the left-hand side, there's a link to the IT subway map. In the middle, there's a checklist. There's more on customs clearance, that kind of stuff. Also provided by Descartes. So we have created a very practical checklist for denied party screening. Very important, especially with the all the regulations, and with Trump, maybe we see more. And on the right hand side, there's a direct link to the demo of Descartes for a TMS, and there's also the contact details of Elmer. With this, the audience, I would like to thank you for listening in live or on the recording. And Albert, thank you for your explanation. Very interesting to see how it's relates from TMS to a control tower. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right. So as of now, I'm going to wrap up. So I will close down. Thank you for joining, and maybe I will see you in the virtual lounge right after this, or maybe I will see you in another webinar in the next few weeks. Thanks for now, and bye-bye.